Video games are a special media, fueled by passionate people with world-class talent that are doing what they love. And from looking for an escape to finding worldwide success, one of Sony's key studios personifies that. Sucker Punch came to be when a group of 5 friends that met while working together at Microsoft, quote, left cushy jobs at Microsoft, sublet some crafty office down the street, and got to work on our first game. The game that started Sucker Punch was a hidden gem platformer for the Nintendo 64 called Rocket Robot on Wheels. And while Rocket Robot didn't set the world on fire, it showed enough promise to keep the lights on at Sucker Punch and featured one detail that would serve as a launching pad for the studio's first major success. You see, the antagonist of Rocket Robot on Wheels is a criminally minded raccoon. Starting with Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus. The first thing that sticks out to me is how good this game looks 20 years later.
Sly! Come in! Sly! Do you read me?
This was a conscious effort that set the tone for the legacy of beautiful video games that would come from Sucker Punch. It all culminated in Ghost of Tsushima's 2020 Game Award for Art Direction. And the director's cut of that game comes to PC on May 16th, and I can't be more excited. And in the case of Sly Cooper, the art leads had an aesthetic in mind from the start that shone through from front to back.
We very early on wanted to make a game that looked and felt like a cartoon, but was one step closer to realism rather than flat and graphic.
That tendency to nail the look of games continued into the studio's later projects. Taking time to get defined looks established is most likely responsible for Sucker Punch sticking to series and producing 8 games in 23 years, 1 being Rocket Robot on Wheels, 3 coming from Sly Cooper, the trilogy of infamous games, and Ghost of Tsushima. 8 games in total is a far cry from most developers that are considered to be at the top of the industry. By comparison, Guerrilla Games has put out 13 games with a larger development team. Double Fine Productions made over 30 games with a similar team size. And on the larger side of the spectrum, Rockstar has put out 47 titles with a team in the thousands. However, every one of Sucker Punch's franchises has at least reached cult classic status. And if you stack those lows up with the lows of the other devs I just mentioned, it becomes perfectly clear that while not perfect, Sucker Punch is at least wonderfully consistent. But that's a rather broad look at the company as a whole. So let's zoom back in for a bit and examine the company's first sequel. Sly Cooper 2 Band of Thieves hit the PlayStation 2 on September 14th, 2004, reaching universal praise beyond the Sly Gang's first escapade, gathering some perfect scores, calling it not only a continuation, but a reincarnation, and that Sly 2 sets the bar impossibly high for any platformer to come after. So what's the secret here? How do you take a niche hit and expand it into something special? Well, let's drag senior producer Grady Hunt back into the conversation. Hans!
I think one of the real big strengths at Sucker Punch is it's a very creative team that tends to push themselves.
Back to PlayStation blog, Chris Zimmerman has a quote about Sucker Punch during Sly's development time that should shine a light on the company's approach to improvement during Band of Thieves. Chris says, quote, "Just so you know, whenever we want to remember some detail about our old games, like how to spell Thievius, we search the internet. Those of you behind the awesome Sly Cooper and Infamous websites have our eternal gratitude. We've relied on you countless times over the years. That is at least some indication of being directly connected to the fans, as although Sly was above average, 2 major issues the public had with the game was a lack of gameplay variety and missions that didn't quite feel grand enough. Sly 2 had a tremendous focus on this by making the rest of the Sly crew, Murray and Bentley, playable in a way that all felt drastically different. And all of the characters contribute to much larger missions in their own way.
When I say heist, I mean like classic Hollywood heist film kind of heist, where the last third of the film is all about this big, spectacular, elaborate crime involving many thieves working together to do something huge.
Band of Thieves started off in much the same way that the original did. Sly and the crew are being sneaky boys, with Inspector Carmelita Fox hot on their tails. Emphasis on the hot. Okay, wait, but hold on a second. Seriously, why? This game is made for kids, and you've got a literal fox with big balloons flirting back and forth during the whole series by shooting a ray gun like a grandma after cataracts in between sneaky dialogue.
We're all going to jail.
But aside from sharing an intro running away from furry bait, a major difference between the opening missions is having Bentley front and center with you while working on aggravating the FBI, and Murray showing off terrifying strength while being way into his character and grunting. Turning off sounds after that, hopefully permanently. The mission still goes to show that the small bits of criticism leveled at Thievius Raccoonus is to be addressed within the opening 30 minutes. Levels are larger with more room to explore. There's lots of interaction between cast members, coupled with pacing of a Hollywood heist movie. All of this comes together to be widely considered not only the best Sly Cooper game, but right up there with the best in the history of Sucker Punch. The style and slick presentation remains. Myself, being a huge comic book nerd, have fallen in love with this, and it holds up 20 years later. Man, that makes me feel old. And at this point, the reputation of Sly is very well known, and has been publicly stated that there are no plans for the Band of Thieves to make a return. So instead of digging into my thoughts on the game itself, since there's so many outlets available for that, I think the value of the saga of Sly Cooper that modern games can learn from is that good things happen when you listen to feedback. Well, duh, I hear you say through your screen. But it's truly shocking how rare that is. The public shouts things like,
"Games as a service are bad if they are mishandled and doesn't need to be put into games that don't fit that model."
and then corporations turn around and shout back, "Here's Suicide Squad, stuffed full of these things, and are presented poorly, because we need to make money, and that's an easy way to generate it and offset costs."
Licensed games need to be respected and well put together because IP popularity isn't going to overpower public opinion once word gets out of quality.
Well, here's South Park Snow Day and Gollum, solely because the franchises are popular.
Sports games and shooters are in dire need of a shakeup in design because the formulas are getting old.
Oh yeah? Well, here's the same game year after year after year after year because it makes money. It's easy to feel powerless during this back and forth exchange, but that can't be further from the truth. There are more ways to speak out and stand your ground now than ever before. But in doing so, it's important to remember that a lot of negative decisions and practices affecting games right now aren't being put in place by the people creating them. Rather, a select few at the tops of parent companies trying to squeeze all the money they can out of you. So, review bombing specific titles and coming after individual developers with threats isn't only extreme, but it's a bit like yelling at the cashier because the milk costs too much. A quick example that's happening as I put together this video is Helldivers 2 pulling back on its attempt to force PC players to link their accounts to PlayStation Network. The public didn't like that decision, so they voiced it, and then the people at Arrowhead listened and reversed it. So good job, Arrowhead. Let's group together and speak out respectfully while celebrating the people that do make the changes for the interests of the player base. When those changes were made for Sly 2, they translated to sales as well. Sly 1 started out selling slightly under 1 million copies, and the changes that were applied to Sly 2 that we talked about earlier increased that game's sales to 1.2 million. Overall, Sly 3 was a step back both in terms of game quality and sales, coming in at 764,000 copies. Those numbers also highlight a glaring issue with modern game development: overestimated sales expectations and budget. I know, it sounds like boring business talk, but it's a vital conversation to have if gamers want to retain a wide variety of games. Let's skip ahead to the Sly Cooper franchise's very last game, Thieves in Time. Even though this PlayStation 3 entry definitely didn't reach the heights of Band of Thieves and was developed by Sanzaru Games instead of Sucker Punch, it was still appropriately budgeted for success despite coming up short of previous titles. It's estimated that Thieves in Time had a total development budget of about $9 million, meaning that the game would need to move 413,000 units to break even at its retail price at the time. 580,000 lifetime sales put the game in the green, if only barely. This is despite middle-of-the-road reception, and Sanzaru Games is alive and well, while Sucker Punch has blossomed into bigger and better things. In today's overscaled and budgeted world, 580,000 sales for a first-party game wouldn't only be considered a commercial failure, it would most likely lead to layoffs, if not closures, of entire studios. Just in the first week of May alone, Microsoft announced a closure of 2 development companies and layoffs at another. Arcane Austin is one of the branches that is now permanently closed, and they are a perfect example of this. Austin's biggest success up to this point is Prey, a 2017 single-player sci-fi shooter. Prey has reviewed well and carved out a reputation as a hidden gem. It also sold okay, but isn't a mega hit by any means. Things went wrong with Arcane Austin when they were acquired by Microsoft Game Studios and began work on Redfall. Now, I'm not here to say that Redfall doesn't deserve the reception that it got, or that it's somehow an overlooked treasure of a game. As a matter of fact, I'm here to say the opposite. Redfall is a miserable failure of an experience, but the developers behind the game shouldn't have to shoulder the blame. Unfortunately, any large-scale project, be that video games, movies, real estate, or whatever else costs an irresponsible amount of money, is at the mercy of whoever funds the project. In the case of Arcane Austin, Xbox has been promising and promoting a creative vision of freedom for its studios under Xbox's ownership, which sounds like a perfect environment for a team known for releasing dense immersive sims. In reality, though, the state and features that Redfall released in is an indicator of Xbox practicing the exact opposite. When development began on Redfall, Arcane was staffed for games that it was known for: single-player, story-driven experiences. So naturally, under Xbox's leadership, Redfall had a massive emphasis on multiplayer, despite little to no multiplayer infrastructure or staff existing at Arcane. Encouragement to strive for replayability at the cost of the deep storytelling that Arcane built Game of the Year contenders on, and a strict deadline to hit Game Pass and kick off Xbox's grand vision of healthy studios under one roof arguably was the cause for the game shipping with more bugs than vampires. All the while, Xbox was positioning the game to be the next big thing from an award-winning studio, and the first pillar of the company's grand dreams of success and profit. You might as well say, hey, Arcane Austin, make a great game full of features that you're uncomfortable with on a tight deadline, and it better be successful enough to have infinite earning potential, or else. And the closure of Tango is proof that even if they are acclaimed critical successes, the only thing that matters is the bottom line. If I take a step back into reality, anyone who has lost a job, especially one that you've worked so hard on and that you enjoy, you know how much that process hurts and how much it can change your life. So for Xbox to seemingly be building goodwill and then publicly remove jobs from people because that's just business is really disheartening. So, how do the woes of today's gaming industry compare to a silly platformer from 20 years ago? Well, my opinion says that Sly Cooper is the perfect analogy for what the AAA gaming industry needs to return to. Moreover, given the current trajectory of the space, it won't be a choice and rather a forced decision to scale back on what is produced. And if that doesn't happen soon, it will cost more people jobs. The raccoon was never expected to carry the weight of entire companies, but rather capitalize on a fun, innovative idea with fresh characters that didn't cost the whole studio's net worth to produce. So, even if the games came up short of expectations, they could still move on to something else. Which brings us to Honor Among Thieves. Being the last of the Sucker Punch trilogy of Cooper capers, it's natural to expect a little bit of a sales decline, given that they are now 2 games that need to be gone through in preparation for the third. And that's exactly what happened. Honor Among Thieves came out and underperformed in comparison to its peers. It was more of the same as the other 2 games, so it's still considered to be a solid platformer, but it didn't have the fresh characters of the first game or the growth and innovation in the second. Because of that, it undersold. But the key here is that it was okay to come up a bit short because it was planned accordingly, just like the rest of the series. Regardless, it still served as an effective wrap-up in a series of 3D platformers with entertaining characters that wouldn't get greenlit today outside of the indie scene. All of these recent closures solidify the fact that the studios aren't truly being given the opportunity to innovate and develop staff with the skills necessary to eventually create the industry-shaking, phenomenal, big-budget games that we all love. On paper, smaller studios with a larger overseeing body should be a good thing that allows for big leaps into AAA spaces from indie or small companies that wouldn't be possible without things like financial backing or assistance with recruitment. Instead, they get acquired and asked to make a money printer, and when that doesn't work out, they're shown the door. But without small games made in the AA space, meaning larger than an indie team of a handful of people, but smaller than a team of several hundred like Rockstar, we won't get effective blockbusters that are also profitable. Sucker Punch needed games like Sly Cooper, small-scale, innovative experiences for a small team at the time to learn on. Then they turned into a first-party studio for Sony before expanding into Infamous and finally getting the confidence and skills necessary to make Ghost of Tsushima. Instead, small-scale award winners aren't good enough, and coming up short of lofty expectations while being stuffed full of trends is unacceptable. If this continues, the gaming industry will be reduced to indies and pre-existing major franchises with next to nothing in between. In Microsoft's own words,
you know, we're a platform where you can play GTA, but you can also play Palworld, where you can play Call of Duty, and you can also play Pentiment. That doesn't change. And frankly, our commitment to Bethesda and the role that it plays is part of Xbox and everything we do.
But it's not their big studios that are facing closures, it's the small ones, which doesn't sound very supportive to me. Even outside of Xbox, Corporations like Embracer Group are collapsing under the weight of inflated expectations and greed, even while most companies are pulling in record profits. I'm not asking for a revival. If the Cooper clan made a return, it would more than likely fall into the same overhyping cycle present in every game I've talked about so far. But we do need a hero, in the form of a change of approach, before it's too late.